Hey guys, welcome to Y&R Daily Update YouTube channel. Today's topics: spoilers that Billy had always been the kind of man who ran toward fire, convinced he could wrestle it into submission. Sally had learned to build her life on edges without looking down. That volatile chemistry had served them until the day Sally drew a line in the sand and asked Billy to choose. It wasn't just about romance, she told herself. It was about survival. Chancellor had become an obsession for Billy, a proxy war he waged for pride, for legacy, for the old wound named Jill that he still pretended no longer bled. Every new stunt, every public jab, every late-night meeting felt like a dare to fate. Sally understood grief and fury more intimately than she wished, but she also knew what it did to people when it metastasized into purpose. She could read it on Billy's face each time Jill's name hovered in a room like a ghost neither of them would acknowledge. This wasn't corporate strategy, it was penance set on fire. So she spoke plainly, perhaps too plainly, because there are moments when gentle words only fog the glass and delay the crash. If he wanted a life with her, he had to stop feeding the grudge and stop treating Chancellor like a weapon aimed at the past. He heard her, and yet he didn't. In Billy's mind, love and war could coexist if he juggled hard enough. He told himself that Sally was asking for balance, not surrender, and that a man could chase justice for Jill's memory while planning a future with the woman he loved. But the subtext of Sally's ultimatum, Chancellor or us, landed with the gravity of a verdict he wasn't ready to accept. He thought of all the hours he had poured into his strategy, of the promises he'd made to himself in the dark about proving everyone wrong, about proving that his instincts were more than restless impulses. He thought about Jill, larger than life in every chapter of his past, the way Lucinder studied him and wrecked him in equal measure. And he thought about Sally, the rare person who could call him out without making him feel small. For a man who thrived on immediacy, he discovered there are decisions that stretch a second into a century. He blinked, and in that blink, Sally read hesitation. She saw the calculus behind his eyes and understood with dreadful clarity that he wasn't ready to step away from the fight. Not for her. Not yet. What began as a hard conversation swerved into something messier. Temper spiked, words sharpened, the floor suddenly tilting beneath them like a ship taking water. Sally's breath hitched, not only from anger, but from fear. Fear that she was about to lose him to a revenge play that would eventually swallow them both. She reached for the door, for air, for space, anything to stop the spiral. Billy reached too, whether to stop her from leaving, to steady her, or simply because instinct told him to keep the center from splitting. Hands met in the wrong rhythm, elbows caught, the kind of graceless human collision that happens when two people try to exit the same moment in opposite directions. Pain flashed, sharp and immediate. Sally stumbled against the corner of a table, a jolt up her ribs that made the room pop white. She swore she was fine even as the world began to hum at the edges. Billy's face drained of color. His apologies tripwired over each other, but adrenaline does not negotiate. Within minutes, a medic was asking her to breathe slowly and count while Billy hovered with that specific terror reserved for witnessing the consequences of your own chaos. At the clinic, clarity arrived in the antiseptic quiet that always makes truth sound louder. Sally's complaints were precise. She hadn't been hurt by an accident so much as by a campaign. Billy's campaign against a past that refused to answer back. "I'm the collateral," she told the ceiling while a nurse checked her vitals. That was the marrow of it. Not that Billy set out to harm her, but that his need to settle scores created a weather system where injuries were inevitable. She recited the litany she'd been storing, the cancelled dinners, the evasive texts, the way every accomplishment of theirs had been framed as a distraction from a more important battle. She even tried to justify him to herself, reminding her own heart that grief has a way of making tyrants out of good people, but the more she argued both sides, the clearer the verdict. She would not be a supporting character in the ongoing saga of Jill, understanding why. Billy hurt did not obligate her to live inside that hurt. When he came to see her later, his eyes were raw with remorse and stubbornness in equal measure. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. He wanted to fix it. Both the bruise blossoming beneath her sweater and the rift that had widened between them since the ultimatum. He led with apology, then veered into explanation. He promised to throttle back, then drifted into just one more move. The familiar preface to every relapse into brinkmanship. Sally listened because she always had, because love is nothing if not patient until patience becomes another word for permission. She told him she understood exactly why he was angry about Jill and would never try to rewrite the meaning of that loss. But she also told him anger couldn't be the architect of their life together. She asked the question with no metaphor, no soft landing. Choose. Not because she delighted in forcing his hand, but because his refusal to choose was already choosing for them. Billy froze at the crossroads, and in that freeze, Sally felt a finality that tasted like iron. She saw him looking over her shoulder at a battlefield only he could see. She saw the boy who had always believed that if he fought hard enough, he could bend the universe into fairness. And she saw the man who loved her, standing right there, unable to reconcile the tug-of war between vengeance and devotion. He left before he meant to leave with the thousand-year stare of someone bargaining with himself. The door clicked, and the room filled with the quieter sound of a heart unclenching into resignation. Sally believed, not unfairly, that his silence had told her everything she needed to know. She started to make peace with the simplest, most brutal interpretation. When a man hesitates about you, he's already answered. But love has a habit of boomeranging once it's been thrown away. Billy returned as if pulled back by gravity, speaking without theater for the first time that day. He didn't pretend the hesitation hadn't happened. He didn't dress it up as strategy or claim he needed to gather facts. He called it what it was, fear. And then he did the thing fear hates most. He said the plain truth. Sally was not an accessory to his life. She was the point of it. He told her he loved her with the urgent steadiness of someone finally done with performative declarations. And because Sally's strength has never been cynicism, she let herself answer in kind. She loved him. She had loved him through the noise and the self-inflicted storms. Loved him enough to demand a version of him that could stand still without reaching for the next fire. In that exchange, they didn't erase the day, but they reframed it. Two people acknowledging both the wound and the will to heal it. He chose her. The words were simple, the implications complicated. Choosing Sally meant more than stepping back from a press release or shoving a boardroom ambush. It meant untangling the quiet addiction to conflict that had long masqueraded as purpose. Billy admitted, almost with relief, that they might not get everything they wanted. That concession was not a retreat so much as a real. He could still honor Jill without reenacting the same war with new opponents. He could still be ambitious without letting ambition draft their relationship into service. The high he chased from one more move was already costing him the only outcome that actually mattered to him when the house lights came up. A future with Sally that didn't require qualifiers. Where once he viewed compromise as defeat, he now recognized it as design. The architecture of a life that could withstand weather. Outside their fragile détente, Jack watched with the weary affection of a man who has been both audience and collateral to Billy's combustions for years. Jack didn't distrust Billy's heart. He distrusted its attention span. He worried that sincerity would, as it often had, congeal into grand gestures followed by restlessness. He worried that choosing Sally would hold until the first rumor of a chancellor opportunity drifted through a corridor, until the first adversary smirked at a cocktail party, until the old returned with its persuasive itch to prove something that didn't need proving. If Jack sounded skeptical, it was the skepticism of someone who loved Billy enough to remember his patterns in detail. He hoped aloud, mostly to himself, that this time would be different. That the shock of seeing Sally in a clinic gown and the echo of losing Jill would combine into a lesson Billy wouldn't forget by Monday. But hope, Jack knew, is not a plan. He needed to see process, not just promises. For Sally and Billy, the next days unfolded like a sobriety test for the soul. He canceled meetings that existed only to stage power, phoned partners to reset expectations, and began the unglamorous work of replacing adrenaline with intention. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. He put into writing what he intended to do, and more importantly, what he intended not to do. No more midnight raids on his own piece. No more weaponizing corporate playbooks to exercise personal ghosts. No more letting Jill's absence write their calendar. Sally didn't demand penance. She asked for practice. She wanted visibility into his choices and a voice in their impact. She asked him to sit with discomfort when an opponent scored a point and to resist the reflex to answer with spectacle. She invited him again and again into the mundanity that makes long love possible. Dinners kept, calls returned, silences shared without premises collapsing. In response, Billy learned the odd relief of saying not this time and discovering the world didn't end. None of this turned the day of the ultimatum into a fairy tale. It turned it into a pivot. Sally still carried a bruise that told the truth about what chaos does when it's welcomed as a guest. She still caught herself flinching when Billy's phone lit up with an unknown number. He still felt his palms prickle at headlines and provocations designed to lure him back onto the stage. But the difference was visible even to them. The fight had moved from out there to in here, from spectacle to stewardship. They both repeated a new refrain when the air got thin. Love is not a reward for winning wars. It's EOMC greater than the reason to stop starting them. As for Jack, his worry did not evaporate, but it softened around the edges as he watched Billy choose boring over brilliant on days when brilliant would have made noise and gotten him applause. It is hard to believe in change until it is practiced in quiet, untelevised hours. Slowly, grudgingly, Jack allowed that the man he doubted might also be the man who grows. In Genoa City, nothing stays still for long. Rivals will test boundaries, and a scandal will knock on the door just to see who answers. But for once, the story of Billy and Sally is not a cliff dive, but a build. He chose her, and in doing so, he chose a life that might never impress the part of him that craves victory laps, but could finally satisfy the part that wants to wake up next to the same person more days than not. She chose him, and in doing so, she chose to believe that a man defined by the fires he chased could learn to tend a hearth instead. They will not get everything they want. That was true when Billy said it, and will be true tomorrow. Yet, if they keep choosing the same thing for long enough, the absence of everything will stop feeling like a loss and start feeling like a design. And if Jack needs proof, he'll find it not in a headline or a handshake, but in the quiet where Billy once heard only the drumbeat of the next fight. And now here's Sally ask what they should make for dinner. Genoa City has never suffered a shortage of power players. But some days the currents run so fast that even veterans misjudge the undertow. That is the day Lauren realizes the man she trusts most has waded back into murky water and is convinced he can swim it without drowning. The update reaches her the way consequential news often does in this town, half rumor, half precision. Michael has installed himself as a broker between Kane and the field of targets Kane intends to bend. And the headline beneath the headline is worse. The brokerage is not neutral. It is a lever concealed inside an outstretched hand. A way to sabotage Kane's takeover ambitions from the inside while projecting competence from the outside. To the city at large, it looks like Michael has traded one perilous job for another. To Lauren, it feels like a familiar pattern returning with new vocabulary. The dangerous conviction that he alone can manage competing truths and outfox men who define themselves by the games they play. She spends the first hour trying to dismiss the ache of déjà vu, the second cataloging how many times the strategy has worked for him, and the third admitting that even when it works, the cost is too high. What unsettles her more than the mechanics is the psychology surrounding them. Kane is not the most formidable antagonist Genoa City has seen, but he is adaptive. And adaptive men learn quickly from the monsters they study. In his posture, Lauren recognizes a posture she has seen before. The blend of charm, audacity, and iron refusal to be told no. It is not flattery when the comparison rises unbidden. It is taxonomy. In the private space, where spouses tell the truths they would not speak at a board meeting, Lauren quietly files Kane under a familiar genus. He is a younger iteration of Victor's ethos, less seasoned but burning with the same appetite for control, masked as destiny. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Michael laughs off the analogy when she first voices it because laugh lines take the sting out of prophecies and because he refuses to concede that Kane belongs in the same sentence as a titan who has kept this town orbiting for decades. The difference, Michael insists, is that Kane believes power is a destination, whereas Victor knows it is a posture one must maintain every hour, every season, every year. Lauren hears the rationale, but her worry does not dislodge. Men who treat people like chessboards always find a way to spill blood on the squares. And she doesn't want to watch her husband mop it up again. The practical problem is simpler to state than to solve. Michael's plan relies on proximity and silence. To sabotage Kane's consolidation push, he must help engineer flows of information and capital that appear seamless, while lacing them with micro-failures that slow or misdirect Kane's strategy at pivotal moments. To maintain that access, he must project unthreatening competence and never once blink at the wrong cue. To keep Lawrence safe from the fallout, he must tell her just enough to satisfy her while omitting the single fact that could detonate her trust that he is feeding insider contours to Victor, who intends to use them to grind Kane's angles down to dust and, if possible, turn the milling into a public object lesson. Silence, in this case, is not simply omission. It is a structural beam holding up the entire operation. If he removes it, the roof collapses. If he keeps it, the marriage cacks. Lauren tries to locate the ground between partnership and complicity. She could accept risk if it were clean, something one confronts together with defined edges. What she resents is the fog, the sense that every explanation has a shadow narrative attached. She decides on a principle that sounds clinical but feels like oxygen: transparency as a condition for proximity. She will not stand beside him in the storm if he insists on drawing maps she cannot read until the lightning has already struck, and then like an omen that arrives wrapped in relief. Michael confirms one thing she feared and sidesteps the one that would shatter the room. He is not working for Victor. He assures her, or rather, he is not on Victor's payroll, not executing stipulated tasks under contract. The distinction calms the part of her that imagined a hidden retainer agreement and a direct line from their living room to Victor's office. It does nothing to quiet the subtler truth she will not be allowed to see. He is in practice reporting to Victor, delivering insider texture at a cadence designed to keep the older man 2 steps ahead while preserving plausible deniability all around. Lauren chooses to take the relief offered because sometimes survival within a marriage of complex people requires accepting the least damaging fact available and saving one's energy for the battle that will matter. Meanwhile, inside Kane's camp, the narrative is simpler because it is ruthlessly singular. He wants Jabbo disoriented and then cornered. If he can destabilize the trust that keeps its leadership aligned, the rest will follow like a series of toppled dominoes. Michael's emergence as a broker is both useful and suspicious. Useful because Michael opens doors. Kane prefers not to kick him publicly. Suspicious because Michael's history is littered with feints. Kane chooses to treat the risk as a variable he can measure. He assigns watchers. He double verifies every number and term sheet. He reframes delays as patience rather than weakness. What he cannot account for is a visitor who will not be measured by anyone's spreadsheet. Victor walks into the room like a verdict, not a guest, and reminds Kane in the smooth grammar of threats that there is still a ledger between them with a balance toggling toward collection. The blackmail is not crude or melodramatic. It is a calmly placed hand on the table that says, in effect, this is what you owe for previous trespasses, and this is how you will pay. You will make choices that align with my objectives, and you will call those choices your strategy. Kane, to his credit, does not capitulate in the first 5 minutes. He asks for time to convert pressure into options. Victor allows the performance because he knows what tomorrow looks like and because part of power is letting the other man pretend he still has doors to open. The substance beneath the theater is cold and clear. The attack on Jabba will continue, not someday, not after consultations, but tomorrow, with or without Kane's enthusiastic consent. Victor intends to simultaneously test Kane's elasticity and Jabbo's ability to absorb impact. If Kane folds, he becomes an instrument. If he resists, he becomes a sacrifice. From Victor's vantage point, either outcome educates the room. The older man leaves with the quiet promise of a clock already started. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Kane exhales and confronts the unromantic math of leverage. Every genius move he imagines will be made inside a box he did not choose. Back at home, Lauren and Michael live the small hours where strategy collides with ritual. They make dinner. They negotiate over a bottle, left only half-finished oddish because both of them need clear heads in a city where intoxicants appear in more forms than wine. Lauren keeps her conditions concise. No more secrets, no more heroics that define success as a story no one else can verify. She announces a resignation that is less about a job title than a role. She will resign from being the person who is reassured last, who learns the reality only after the consequences have ripened. She will step back from proximity to whatever game he refuses to describe. Michael listens and for once resists the urge to solve with a monologue. He maps the next 48 hours in his head, the calls he must make, the pressure he must absorb, the precise points where softening will look like weakness and hardness will look like betrayal. He tells himself the same story. Men like him always tell at the threshold of a new complication that this time the calibration will be flawless, that his read on Victor and Kane and Jabbo and Lauren will harmonize without a single note slipping. Even as he crafts the confidence, he feels a sting of honesty at the edge of it. No one negotiates with Victor without eventually paying in a currency they did not intend to spend. Jabbo, for its part, senses the weather change without yet knowing the storm track. A sudden flurry of inquiries about legacy contracts, an unusual pattern of whispers around a pending vote, a harmless-looking request for a facilities review that arrives from a firm oddly adjacent to Kane's orbit. Each item on its own is explainable. Together, they spell a diagnostic. Someone is probing for soft tissue. Inside the executive suite, nerves tighten and the leadership reaches for the 2 levers companies always reach for under siege: communication and control. The first they increase, the second they overestimate. A plan is drafted, then redrafted to meet an attack that has not identified itself. Jack's phone lights up more than usual. He answers every time because vigilance has become a second profession. He worries about the enemy he can name and the ally whose appetite for high-wire maneuvers he knows too well. If Billy were the centerpiece of this particular crisis, Jack would already be triaging damage. With Michael involved, the risk is subtler. A plan that appears noble at the base, but snakes into off-ramps that end in rooms where Victor never loses. When morning arrives, it arrives with the crisp inevitability of an event long scheduled. Victor's machinery hums to life. Briefings here, a leak there, a suggestion whispered into the right ear that turns into a headline 2 hours later. Kane discovers that tomorrow is not a threat so much as an itinerary someone else booked for him. A meeting he considered essential is cancelled at the last minute because a board member, he presumed neutral, has abruptly decided to revisit a vote. A lender once eager cites macro uncertainty and requests an extension that will choke momentum at the worst possible juncture. None of these blows are mortal. Together they function like a constrictor, tightening every time Kane exhales. He starts to suspect that the harmless broker who promised to keep the pipes clear has been venting steam at critical junctions. Michael, if asked directly, would deny sabotage and point to the apparent randomness of market moods, but his calendar tells the truer story. Carefully timed messages communicated to an old adversary who thrives on precision. In the space between moves, relationships either fracture or deepen. Lauren's stance clarifies into habit. She no longer chases the details Michael edits out. She replaces interrogation with boundaries. It is not an abdication, but a reassertion of terms. If he insists on standing between sharks while bleeding, he will do it, knowing the cost at home is measured not only in apologies, but in distance. Michael discovers that guilt is a poor strategist. It only breeds more noise. He makes fewer just-in-case calls and more informed decisions, paring his involvement to the handful of actions that genuinely blunt Kane's edge rather than satisfy his own itch to outmaneuver Victor at Victor's own sport. In doing so, he accidentally stumbles upon an unexpected equilibrium. When he stops trying to be the smartest man in every room, he becomes a better man in the one that matters. None of this answers the immediate question that animates Genoa City after Victor's visit. What does continue the attack on Jabba tomorrow actually look like in outcomes rather than tactics? Subscribe our channel for more latest update. The honest answer is that it looks less like a raid than a campaign. A sequence of low-grade disruptions designed to tempt Jabbo into an overreaction and to coax Kane into a sequence of commitments he cannot honor simultaneously. Victor is not after headlines, though he never minds collecting them. He is after compliance. If he has to corral Kane into it via the memory of leverage, he will. If he has to spook Jabbo into it by proving their perimeter is porous, he will. Either way, he will make it clear that the town still runs on the schedule of men who dislike being told no. By dusk, the new equilibrium is still theoretical, and the old fault lines hum beneath the floorboards. Lauren has not stopped worrying, but she has converted worry into a plan for her own sanity. Clear expectations, immovable lines, vigilance without martyrdom. Michael has not stopped playing his dangerous game, but he has narrowed its aperture and admitted, if only to himself, that he cannot proxy fight every battle without turning into the very thing Lauren compared Kane to. Kane has not stopped reaching, but his reach meets resistance in places he did not anticipate. And Victor, satisfied with the day's progress, trusts tomorrow to complete the lesson. Genoa City, ever itself, settles into the electric quiet that precedes another round. In that quiet, the human truth briefly overwhelms the corporate choreography. Marriages either survive secrets or they don't. Men either learn from monsters or become them. And empires either withstand pressure or discover which pillar was always load-bearing. Tonight, every player believes he can still choose which sentence will be true for him in the morning. Tomorrow, the city will begin the work of proving them right or reminding them. How often belief and outcome part ways in the hands of those who confuse leverage with immunity. Subscribe our channel for more latest updates.